an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. Lady Catherine Harrington's gloved fingers trembled as she leaned close to the Duke of Blackwood, her whispered warning barely audible above the orchestra. "Don't drink that." The Duke's dark eyes met hers for only a fraction of a second before his hand tilted deliberately, crimson wine spilling across pristine white linen like blood. Silence rippled through the glittering ballroom as he placed his hand over hers, his single word, "mine," echoing with quiet authority that transformed her impulsive intervention into something far more dangerous. Catherine felt the weight of 100 aristocratic stares burning into her back as the Countess Lavinia's painted smile hardened into something venomous. By morning, her reputation would lie in tatters, unless the Duke's unexpected protection proved stronger than the whispers already racing through Westmoreland House. The winter ball at Westmoreland House represented everything Lady Catherine Harrington had been taught to value. Elegance without ostentation, wealth without vulgarity, power without crude display. Crystal chandeliers cast their golden light over the cream of society, transforming even the most ordinary faces into something luminous and significant. Catherine stood near a marble column, her champagne untouched, watching. At 24, she had attended enough such gatherings to understand their true purpose. Not merely celebration, but calibration of the social order. Every conversation, every dance, every glance was a move in an intricate game whose rules had been established generations before she was born. "The Duke has arrived," her friend Miss Eleanor Pembroke whispered, nodding discreetly toward the entrance, precisely on time as always. The Duke of Blackwood moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who never needed to assert his importance, tall and austere in impeccable evening clothes. He acknowledged greetings with minimal courtesy. His reputation preceded him, brilliant, cold, exacting in his judgments. Some called him merciless, others merely just. "They say he can destroy a person with a single word," Eleanor continued, her voice hushed with delicious dread, "or elevate them just as easily." Catherine studied him with clinical interest. People always exaggerate the power of those they fear. Perhaps, but even Lord Harwick consulted him before proposing that bill in Parliament. The Duke moved toward the far end of the ballroom, where the Countess Lavinia Rothmore held court among her admirers. The Countess, beautiful, charming, and according to Catherine's observations, utterly without scruple, greeted him with practiced warmth. "The Countess seems determined to secure his attention," Catherine noted. "She's been cultivating his acquaintance ever since her ward, Miss Ainsley, came into her fortune," Eleanor replied. "Though I can't imagine the Duke would be interested in either of them." Catherine watched as a servant approached with a tray of wine glasses. The Duke selected one, nodding his thanks, but something in the exchange caught Catherine's attention. A slight gesture from the Countess to her companion, Lord Huxley, followed by his casual movement toward the servant. Had Lord Huxley touched the Duke's glass, or merely passed too close to the tray? Catherine frowned. Perhaps it was nothing, but she had been raised to observe details others missed, and something in that moment, fleeting as it was, struck her as deliberately orchestrated. The Duke raised his glass. Catherine's heart quickened as she tracked the Duke's movements across the ballroom. The wine in his glass caught the candlelight, deep red against crystal. Lord Huxley had definitely interfered. She was certain now. His sleeve had brushed the servant's tray, and something had passed from his hand to the Duke's designated glass. She had seconds to decide. To remain silent was safe. To speak was to risk everything. The orchestra transitioned to a waltz. The crowd shifted, opening a path between Catherine and the Duke, who stood now near the grand fireplace, exchanging pleasantries with an elderly baroness. The glass remained untouched in his hand. Catherine moved without conscious decision, her silk skirts whispering against the polished floor. She felt rather than saw Eleanor's startled glance, the Countess Lavinia's sudden attention. None of that mattered. Only the wine and the Duke's hand lifting it toward his lips. "Your Grace," she said, executing a perfect curtsy before him. "I believe we have not been formally introduced. Lady Catherine Harrington." His eyes, darker than she had expected, almost black in the candlelight, assessed her with cool precision. "Lady Catherine." He inclined his head slightly. Your father's reputation for integrity precedes you. She stepped closer. Close enough that propriety trembled at the edge of impropriety. Close enough that when she spoke, only he could hear. Don't drink that, she murmured, her voice barely a breath. The Duke's expression did not change. Not a flicker of surprise crossed his features. Yet something in his eyes sharpened. For a heartbeat, he held her gaze, and Catherine felt herself being measured, evaluated, understood. Then, with deliberate care, he tilted his hand. Wine splashed onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a wound. The sudden silence was deafening. Your Grace! The Countess Lavinia materialized beside them, her voice a perfect blend of concern and amusement. How unlike you to be careless. Allow me to fetch you another glass. That won't be necessary, Countess. The Duke's voice was quiet, but carried effortlessly. He placed his hand over Catherine's gloved one, where it rested on the table. Lady Catherine was just offering her company for the next dance. The Countess's smile thinned. Was she indeed? How? Forward. Catherine felt the room's attention like a physical weight. She had miscalculated badly. Whatever she had seen, or thought she had seen, was now irrelevant. She had placed herself in an impossible position. Either the eccentric young woman who whispered to dukes, or worse, the ambitious one who engineered private moments with England's most eligible bachelor. Lady Catherine understands me perfectly, the Duke said, his gaze never leaving Catherine's face. Don't you? She managed to nod, her throat dry. Good. He lifted her hand. Then we understand each other. The spilled wine darkened from crimson to black as it seeped into the white linen. Catherine stood frozen, acutely aware of the Duke's hand still covering hers, of the circle of silence that had formed around them. The Countess Lavinia's smile had calcified into something brittle and dangerous. I'm afraid I've created a spectacle, Catherine said softly, attempting to withdraw her hand. The Duke's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. The spectacle was not of your making, Lady Catherine. Lord Huxley appeared at the Countess's side, his expression carefully neutral. Is something amiss, Your Grace? Nothing that concerns you, Huxley. The Duke's tone was pleasant, but Catherine felt the steel beneath it. He turned to face the small gathering that had formed around them, his hand still firmly clasping hers. Lady Catherine has kindly agreed to partner me for the evening. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The Duke of Blackwood never singled out companions at social events. He arrived alone, spoke when necessary, and departed without ceremony. This public claim was unprecedented. Your Grace, the Countess said, her voice honey-sweet. I had hoped to introduce you to my ward, Miss Ainsley. She's quite an accomplished pianist. Another time, perhaps. The Duke's dismissal was polite but absolute. He turned to Catherine, his expression unreadable. Shall we? Before she could respond, a footman approached with a fresh glass of wine on a silver tray. The Duke lifted his free hand to accept it. But Catherine, acting on instinct, shifted slightly, placing herself between him and the offered drink. His Grace prefers water this evening, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The footman hesitated, glancing from Catherine to the Duke. Mine, the Duke said, the single word resonating with unmistakable authority. Not a claim of possession, but of responsibility, of protection. The footman bowed and withdrew. The crowd parted as the Duke guided Catherine toward the dance floor, leaving the spilled wine and the Countess's narrowed gaze behind them. You've made an enemy tonight, he murmured as they took their positions for the waltz. I suspect she was never my friend, Catherine replied. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No. The Countess collects useful people, not friends. As they moved through the steps of the dance, Catherine felt the weight of 100 speculative stares. By morning, her reputation would be the subject of drawing-room dissections throughout London. The quiet, sensible daughter of Lord Harrington, suddenly thrust into notoriety by a spilled glass of wine and a Duke's unexpected attention. Why did you warn me? He asked, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Catherine met his gaze directly. Because it was right. Dawn arrived with the sound of hushed voices outside Catherine's guest chamber at Westmoreland House. She had slept poorly, her dreams troubled by spilled wine and whispered accusations. Rising, she moved to the window, watching as early light transformed the frost-covered gardens into a landscape of diamonds and silver. A discreet knock announced her lady's maid, Martha, bearing a breakfast tray, and an expression of careful neutrality. "Good morning, my lady. I've brought your chocolate." "Thank you, Martha." Catherine accepted the steaming cup. "What news from below stairs?" Martha hesitated. "There's considerable discussion, my lady, about last night." "I imagine so." Catherine sipped her chocolate, forcing herself to appear unconcerned. "And what is being said?" "Some think you saved the Duke from poison. Others say it was a ploy to gain his attention." Martha busied herself with laying out Catherine's morning dress. "The housekeeper says 3 servants have been questioned already." Catherine set down her cup. "Questioned? By whom?" "The Duke himself, my lady. He arrived before dawn, and has been in the library with Lord Westmoreland since." This was unexpected. Catherine had assumed the Duke would distance himself from the previous night's events, leaving her to weather the social consequences alone. His continued presence suggested something more serious than a social misstep. A second knock interrupted her thoughts. Lady Westmoreland's personal maid stood at the door, her expression grave. "Lady Catherine, her ladyship requests your presence in the blue drawing room, immediately, if you please." Catherine dressed quickly, choosing a gown of deep blue that conveyed appropriate seriousness without suggesting guilt. As she descended the grand staircase, she passed several guests departing early, their curious glances confirming her fears. The incident had already become the subject of speculation. Lady Westmoreland awaited her in the blue drawing room, her posture rigid with displeasure. "Lady Catherine," she began without preamble, "I had hoped your mother's good sense would have been inherited. Last night's display suggests otherwise. I apologize for any disruption, Lady Westmoreland." "Disruption?" The older woman's eyebrows rose. "You created a scandal in my home." Catherine held her gaze steadily. "That was not my intention." "Intentions matter little when reputations are concerned." Lady Westmoreland sighed. "Your parents have been notified. They will send a carriage." "That won't be necessary." Both women turned as the Duke of Blackwood entered, his expression as impassive as ever. "Lady Catherine remains at my invitation," he said, "as my guest." The library at Westmoreland House was a sanctuary of leather and oak, the morning light filtering through tall windows to illuminate shelves of leather-bound volumes. Catherine sat in a high-backed chair across from the Duke, who stood examining a sheet of paper covered in his precise handwriting. "You understand," he said without looking up, "that what I'm about to share requires absolute discretion. Of course, Your Grace." He placed the paper before her. "This is a list of every person who handled food or drink in the main ballroom last night, their positions, and their connections to various guests." Catherine studied the document, impressed by its thoroughness. Names were arranged in a hierarchical pattern, with annotations indicating relationships and suspicious behaviors. "You've been investigating this for some time," she observed. 3 months. The Duke finally sat, his posture perfect even in private. "Since the Countess Lavinia's ward, Miss Ainsley, fell mysteriously ill at a dinner where I was present. You believe the Countess intended to poison you." Catherine kept her voice neutral, though the implications were shocking, not fatally. A temporary illness would suffice for her purposes. His dark eyes met hers. "Tell me what you observed last night." Catherine described the exchange she had witnessed. Lord Huxley's movement toward the servant's tray, the subtle signal from the Countess the moment something passed from his hand to the Duke's glass. "Excellent," he murmured when she finished. "Few would have noticed such details." "My father taught me to observe patterns," she replied, "in people as well as in ledgers." A ghost of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "Lord Harrington's reputation for financial acumen is well deserved. I see his daughter shares his talents." They spent the next hour reviewing the Duke's notes, identifying patterns in the Countess's social calendar, her connections to various households, and the strategic placement of her loyal servants in influential homes. "The pattern suggests she's targeting you specifically," Catherine said, frowning at a particular entry. "But why risk such a scheme? The consequences of discovery would be catastrophic. The Countess controls her ward's fortune only until Miss Ainsley marries," the Duke explained. "A fortune that is rapidly diminishing under the Countess's management. She needs a solution." And that solution is you. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Forgive me, Your Grace, but you hardly seem the type to be manipulated into marriage. I'm not, which is why more creative measures became necessary. He gathered his papers methodically. If I were to fall ill at a gathering, and the Countess's ward were to demonstrate particular care and concern during my recovery, a foundation for gratitude, leading potentially to affection, Catherine concluded. Particularly if the illness left you somewhat diminished in judgment. The Duke nodded. Precisely. But now she knows that I know, Catherine said softly, which makes me a liability. Yes, he agreed. Which is why we must proceed with extreme caution. That afternoon, Catherine found herself walking in the frost-covered gardens beside the Duke. Their breath formed clouds in the winter air, as they maintained a careful distance. Close enough for private conversation, far enough to preserve propriety under the watchful eyes of the house. The Countess has already begun her counterattack, the Duke said, his voice low. 3 different guests approached me this morning with concerns about your stability. Catherine nodded, unsurprised. And Lady Westmoreland clearly wishes me gone. Lady Westmoreland wishes to avoid scandal. The distinction is important. He guided her toward a stone bench, partially screened by evergreen hedges. Tell me, Lady Catherine, why did you risk your reputation to warn me? We had never spoken before last night. The question was direct, his gaze penetrating. Catherine considered her answer carefully. I've observed you at various gatherings, she finally said. You're meticulous in your judgments, fair in your assessments, and protective of those who cannot protect themselves. England needs such men in positions of influence. A political calculation, then, a moral one. She met his gaze steadily. I couldn't watch harm come to a good man when I had the power to prevent it. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. Most would have found a less conspicuous way to intervene. There wasn't time for subtlety. No, he agreed. There wasn't. They sat in silence for a moment, the winter sun casting long shadows across the frost-covered grass. Catherine studied his profile, seeing now what she had missed before. The subtle signs of vigilance, the careful attention he paid to their surroundings, even in this seemingly private moment. You're not as cold as you pretend to be, she said suddenly. Your reputation for detachment is cultivated. He turned to her, one eyebrow raised. An interesting theory. Not a theory, an observation. Catherine smiled slightly. Your coldness is strategic. It keeps people at a distance, allowing you to observe without interference. For a moment, the Duke said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a brief, genuine sound that transformed his austere features. You are dangerously perceptive, Lady Catherine, so I've been told. I suspected the Countess's schemes weeks ago, he admitted. But suspicion without proof is useless. I needed to wait for a misstep. And now we have an opportunity. He rose, offering his hand to help her stand. The Countess believes you acted impulsively, without evidence. She thinks you are vulnerable and isolated. Catherine accepted his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. And am I? No, he said simply. You have me. The morning room at Westmoreland House buzzed with feminine conversation. Needlework frames creating barriers between alliances. Catherine sat near the window, ostensibly focused on her embroidery, while listening to the Countess Lavinia hold court among her admirers. Poor Miss Ainsley is quite overcome, the Countess was saying, her voice pitched to Carrie. The physician insists on complete rest. Her constitution has always been delicate. Catherine's needle paused. This was the 3rd time in as many days that the Countess had mentioned her ward's mysterious ailments. Such a shame, Lady Pembroke replied. And with her coming-of-age ball only weeks away. Yes, her 21st birthday. The Countess sighed dramatically. I had such hopes for her introduction to society as an independent young woman. Catherine noted the emphasis on independent. At 21, Miss Ainsley would gain legal control of her inheritance, unless she were deemed incapable of managing her affairs due to illness or mental infirmity. The Countess's gaze drifted toward Catherine, her smile sharpening. Lady Catherine, you're very quiet this morning. Are you quite well? So many young ladies suffer from nervous disorders these days. I'm in perfect health, thank you. Catherine replied evenly. Though I confess, I find myself concerned about Miss Ainsley. Perhaps a different physician might offer a second opinion. A flicker of annoyance crossed the Countess's face. My personal physician has attended Miss Ainsley since childhood. He understands her constitution perfectly. How fortunate she is to have such dedicated care, Catherine murmured, returning to her embroidery. Later, in the library, she relayed the conversation to the Duke. The pattern becomes clearer, he said, making a note in his journal. Miss Ainsley's mysterious ailments always worsen when financial decisions must be made, or when she shows interest in potential suitors. The Countess means to have her declared incompetent, Catherine concluded. With herself appointed as permanent guardian. Yes. And my apparent interest in you has accelerated her timeline. The Duke closed his journal. My sources report that she's already consulted a lawyer about the legal requirements for such an arrangement. Catherine frowned. But surely Miss Ainsley would protest? Not if she believes herself to be genuinely ill. The Countess has been carefully cultivating her dependency for years. His expression darkened. Small doses of various substances, administered regularly, can create symptoms that mimic natural illness. That's monstrous, Catherine whispered. Indeed. The Duke's voice was grim. And nearly impossible to prove without catching her in the act. Then we must create an opportunity to do exactly that, Catherine said, her mind already formulating a plan. But first, we need to ensure Miss Ainsley's immediate safety. The Duke nodded. I've already taken steps in that direction. The dinner party that evening was small by Westmoreland standards. Only 20 guests, seated at the long table beneath glittering chandeliers. Catherine found herself placed at the Duke's right hand, a position of honor that drew speculative glances from the other guests. The Countess is displeased, Catherine murmured, noting Lavinia's tight smile from her place far down the table. Lady Westmoreland would never have arranged the seating this way. Lady Westmoreland didn't arrange it, the Duke replied, lifting his water glass. I did. Catherine nearly dropped her fork. You rearranged Lady Westmoreland's dinner table. I merely suggested that, as her most titled guest, tradition afforded me certain privileges. His expression remained impassive, but Catherine detected a hint of satisfaction in his voice, including the selection of my dinner companions. That's not actually a tradition, she pointed out. No one challenged the assertion. He signaled to a footman, who approached with a covered dish. I've also taken the liberty of arranging our meals separately. Nothing from the main courses will be served to either of us. Catherine understood immediately. You're protecting me. Us, he corrected. The Countess now perceives you as a threat equal to myself. As the evening progressed, Catherine became aware of the subtle ways the Duke had altered protocols to ensure their safety. Their wine came from bottles opened at the table. Their food was served from dishes that hadn't been accessible to the household staff before dinner. Even their water glasses remained in sight at all times, attended by a footman the Duke had personally selected. The Countess watched these arrangements with growing irritation. When the ladies withdrew after dinner, leaving the gentlemen to their port, she approached Catherine directly. You've made quite an impression on the Duke, she said, her voice honey-sweet. One might almost think you engineered your dramatic intervention for precisely that purpose. Catherine met her gaze calmly. I merely acted as my conscience dictated, Countess. How convenient that your conscience aligns with your ambitions. The Countess's smile never wavered. Though I wonder, does the Duke know about your family's financial difficulties? Your father's investments in the West Indies haven't performed well lately, have they? The barb struck home. Lord Harrington's recent losses were not public knowledge, but the Countess's network of informants was evidently thorough. My family's affairs are not a subject for drawing-room discussion, Catherine replied evenly. No, perhaps they should be. The Countess leaned closer. A desperate family might resort to desperate measures, even fabricating dangers to attract advantageous attention. Before Catherine could respond, the drawing-room doors opened to admit the gentleman. The Duke's gaze found hers immediately, his expression sharpening as he noted her tension. He crossed to her side, breaking protocol by rejoining the ladies before the other men had fully entered the room. Is everything well? He asked quietly. Yes, Catherine said, though her heart raced. But the game has become more dangerous. Dawn found Catherine in the small writing room, adjacent to the library, composing a letter to her parents. She explained her continued stay at Westmoreland House in careful terms, alluding to an important matter, requiring her attention without mentioning the Duke or the Countess explicitly. Her father would understand the deliberate omissions. Lord Harrington had taught her the value of discretion in sensitive matters. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The Duke entered, carrying a leather portfolio. "You're awake early," he observed, closing the door behind him. "I couldn't sleep." Catherine set aside her quill. "The Countess knows about my father's financial difficulties." "Yes, I expected she would investigate your family." He placed the portfolio on the desk between them, just as I investigated hers when I first became suspicious of her activities. He opened the portfolio to reveal documents bearing official seals. "These are copies of Miss Ainsley's trust documents." Her father was remarkably thorough in establishing protections for her inheritance. Catherine scanned the legal language, her brow furrowing. "There's a clause here about medical examinations by 3 independent physicians before any declaration of incompetence." "Precisely. A safeguard the Countess has been working to circumvent." The Duke turned a page. "Note the provision regarding the trust's management should Miss Ainsley marry. Her husband would gain control," Catherine read, "unless the marriage occurs before her 21st birthday, in which case the trust remains under the Countess's supervision until Miss Ainsley turns 25. Understanding dawned. The Countess doesn't just want to prevent Miss Ainsley from marrying you. She needs her to marry someone under her influence, and quickly. Someone like Lord Huxley," the Duke confirmed, "who is, not coincidentally, deeply in debt to the Countess's brother." Catherine sat back, the full scope of the conspiracy now clear. "And if you were to fall mysteriously ill after showing interest in Miss Ainsley, it would eliminate me as a potential suitor, while creating an opportunity for Huxley to play the attentive friend during my recovery." His expression darkened. "A role he has performed before with other targeted heiresses. This isn't just about money," Catherine said softly. "This is systematic predation." The Duke nodded, his gaze meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "Which is why your intervention wasn't merely helpful, Catherine. It was vital." It was the first time he had used her given name. The intimacy of it hung in the air between them. An acknowledgement of something deeper than their tactical alliance. "We need to protect Miss Ainsley," she said, "and expose the Countess without creating a public scandal that would destroy her victim's reputation along with her own." "Yes," the Duke's hand covered hers briefly. "And I believe I know how to accomplish both objectives." In that moment, Catherine realized that what had begun as a whispered warning had evolved into something far more profound, a partnership based on shared values and mutual respect, and perhaps, though neither would yet acknowledge it aloud, something more personal still. The morning room had been transformed for the formal breakfast. Winter sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the white tablecloth and silver service, arranged with mathematical precision. Catherine took her assigned seat, noting the strategic placement of each guest. The Duke had explained his plan the previous evening, a formal breakfast, ostensibly to honor Lord Westmoreland's birthday, would provide the perfect setting for their carefully orchestrated revelation. The guest list was deliberately limited. Lord and Lady Westmoreland, the Countess Lavinia and her ward Miss Ainsley, Lord Huxley, 2 respected magistrates who happened to be visiting, and the Duke's personal physician, introduced simply as Dr. Thompson, Lady Catherine. The Countess greeted her with practiced warmth. "How lovely you look this morning, though perhaps a touch pale. I do hope you're not coming down with something." "I'm excellent health," Catherine replied evenly. "As is Miss Ainsley, I trust." The young woman beside the Countess offered a timid smile, barely 20, with delicate features and downcast eyes. She seemed perpetually exhausted. Catherine noted how her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. The Duke entered last, commanding the room's attention without effort. He greeted each guest formally, his manner revealing nothing of their purpose. "Before we begin," he announced once seated, "I must insist on a small eccentricity. Dr. Thompson, if you would. The physician produced several small packets, distributing one to each place setting. A new custom I've adopted when dining, the Duke explained. Each guest tests their own food and drink for quality. Purity. A flicker of alarm crossed the Countess's face, quickly masked. How unusual, Your Grace. Surely Lady Westmoreland's table requires no such precaution. Indulge me, the Duke replied pleasantly. One can never be too careful these days. Catherine watched as each guest somewhat awkwardly tested their tea and first course. The Countess performed the ritual with exaggerated compliance, her smile fixed. The conversation proceeded naturally through the first course, local politics, the weather, plans for the spring season. Catherine contributed occasionally, but focused primarily on observation. Miss Ainsley ate little, pushing food around her plate. Lord Huxley's gaze darted frequently to the Countess, seeking direction. As the second course was served, the Duke guided the conversation with subtle mastery toward the subject of household management and the proper oversight of servants. The difficulty, he remarked, lies in knowing which staff members have access to what. Food, drink, medicine cabinets, all require proper supervision. Indeed, the Countess agreed. One must be vigilant about who handles such things. Catherine caught the Duke's eye. The trap was set. Now they needed only for the Countess to spring it herself. The breakfast continued with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. Footmen moved silently around the table, replacing the second course with a selection of pastries and fresh fruit. The Duke maintained a steady flow of innocuous conversation, while Catherine observed the subtle tensions building around them. Miss Ainsley grew increasingly withdrawn, her complexion alarmingly pale. Twice she reached for her water glass with trembling fingers, only to have the Countess solicitously assist her. Perhaps some tea instead, my dear, the Countess suggested, signaling to a footman. Your usual blend. Catherine noted the emphasis on usual, and the specific footman summoned. A thin man who had joined the Westmoreland staff only a month earlier, according to the Duke's investigation. Dr. Thompson, seated beside Catherine, leaned forward slightly. Miss Ainsley, you seem unwell. As a physician, I wonder if you might describe your symptoms. Before the young woman could respond, the Countess interjected smoothly. Miss Ainsley suffers from a nervous disposition, Doctor. Excitement exacerbates her condition. I see. The doctor's tone was neutral. And what treatments have been prescribed? A special tea blend, primarily. My personal physician formulated it specifically for her constitution. The footman returned with a delicate porcelain teapot, different from those serving the rest of the table. He poured a cup and placed it before Miss Ainsley, who reached for it with visible relief. How interesting, the Duke remarked. I've always found herbal remedies fascinating. What components make up this particular blend, Countess? A barely perceptible hesitation. Chamomile, primarily. Valerian for calming the nerves. Nothing unusual. Valerian can be quite potent, Dr. Thompson observed, especially when combined with certain medications. The Countess's smile tightened. Miss Ainsley takes no other medications, Doctor. No laudanum. The physician pressed. No sleeping draughts? Certainly not under my supervision, the Countess replied, her voice sharp. I monitor everything she consumes with the greatest care. Catherine saw the mistake immediately. The Countess had revealed knowledge she shouldn't possess. The specific contents of Miss Ainsley's teacup, which had been prepared in the kitchens, not at the table. The Duke's gaze met Catherine's briefly, acknowledging the misstep. How fortunate Miss Ainsley is to have such attentive care, he said evenly. Though I wonder, he reached for the teapot, if I might sample this blend myself. I've been having trouble sleeping lately. No. The Countess's hand shot out, stopping him. That is, it's formulated specifically for Miss Ainsley's constitution. It would be quite inappropriate for anyone else. I see. The Duke withdrew his hand. Then perhaps Dr. Thompson should examine the blend, to ensure it contains only what you've described. The room fell silent. The Countess's face hardened as she realized her position. That won't be necessary, she said coldly. Miss Ainsley and I will be departing immediately. I'm afraid, said one of the magistrates, speaking for the first time. That won't be possible. The winter sun had risen fully now, casting clear, unforgiving light across the breakfast table. The Countess sat rigid in her chair, her composure intact, despite the magistrate's quiet questioning in the adjoining room. Miss Ainsley had been escorted to her chambers, accompanied by Dr. Thompson and a maid selected by the Duke. Catherine remained at the table with the Duke and Lord Westmoreland, the remnants of the breakfast growing cold before them. "Will there be a public trial?" Lord Westmoreland asked, his voice heavy with concern for the scandal that would inevitably touch his house. "No," the Duke replied. "The evidence will be presented privately to the Lord Chancellor. Miss Ainsley's reputation must be protected, and the Countess will be encouraged to retire to her estate in Cornwall, permanently." The Duke's tone left no room for debate. Her finances will be placed under supervision, and Miss Ainsley will be appointed a new guardian, someone beyond reproach. Lord Westmoreland nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I'll leave the details to you then." He rose, bowing slightly to Catherine. "Lady Catherine, your discretion throughout this matter has been exemplary." When they were alone, Catherine finally allowed herself to relax, the tension of the past days draining from her shoulders. "It worked," she said softly. "Exactly as you predicted. We succeeded together," the Duke corrected. "Your observations were essential." A comfortable silence settled between them as servants cleared the table. Through the window, Catherine could see the frost melting from the garden statues, water droplets catching the light like diamonds. "What happens now?" she asked finally. The Duke considered her question, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Ainsley will recover under proper care. The Countess will disappear from society. And you," he paused, studying her face, "will return to your family with your reputation intact. And you," Catherine met his gaze directly, "what will you do, now that this matter is resolved?" Instead of answering, he reached across the table and covered her water glass with his hand, a deliberate echo of that first night when everything had changed. With a whispered warning, "I find I've developed a preference for tea," he said quietly, "when shared with someone whose judgment I trust implicitly." The simple statement contained volumes, not a declaration of passion, but something rarer and more valuable: respect, trust, and the possibility of a future built on both. "Tea would be lovely," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the warmth spreading through her chest. The Duke signaled to a footman, his hand still covering her glass. "Tea for two," he instructed, "and ensure it remains in our sight at all times." Catherine smiled, recognizing both the practical precaution and the deeper meaning beneath it. Some habits of vigilance would never fade, nor should they, but they would face whatever came next together, eyes open, truth between them. Spring had transformed the gardens of Blackwood Estate. Cherry blossoms drifted on gentle breezes, and new green growth softened the formal hedgerows. Catherine walked beside the Duke along a gravel path, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they discussed the latest letter from Miss Ainsley. "Her new guardian reports significant improvement," Catherine noted. "No tremors, no headaches. She's even begun riding again. Excellent news." The Duke's expression softened with genuine pleasure, and the trust. "Secure, with 3 independent trustees overseeing its management until she comes of age next month." Catherine smiled. "She's asked permission to delay her London season until next year. She wishes to focus on her health and education first." A wise decision. They paused beside a small ornamental pond, where golden fish darted beneath lily pads. "And your father's investments, recovering nicely, thanks to your introductions." Catherine's gratitude was tempered by pride. The Duke had provided opportunities, not charity, allowing Lord Harrington to rebuild his fortunes through his own acumen. A comfortable silence settled between them as they continued their walk. In the 2 months since the events at Westmoreland House, their relationship had evolved with deliberate care. The Duke had called formally upon her family. They had been seen together at select social gatherings. Society whispered, of course, but the whispers now carried speculation rather than scandal. "I received a letter from Cornwall yesterday," the Duke said, as they approached a stone bench nestled among flowering shrubs. "The Countess has apparently developed a keen interest in botanical studies. She rarely leaves her estate." "A suitable occupation for her remaining years," Catherine replied. They had agreed never to speak of the Countess with bitterness or triumph, Justice had been served without spectacle, exactly as they had intended. They sat, maintaining a proper distance that nonetheless felt intimate. The Duke, Alexander, as she now thought of him in private moments, studied her face with that particular intensity she had come to treasure. "Catherine," he began, his voice carrying unusual hesitation. "I've been considering the future." "As have I," she admitted. "I find I've grown accustomed to your observations, your perspective, your presence." He paused, choosing his words with characteristic precision. "I would like to make that presence a permanent feature of my life." Catherine felt her heart quicken, but kept her expression composed. "Are you offering me a position as your social analyst, Your Grace?" A rare smile transformed his austere features. "I'm offering you a position as my wife, Lady Catherine. If you would consider it." "I would consider it," she replied, matching his formal tone before allowing her own smile to emerge. "In fact, I've considered it quite thoroughly. And your conclusion?" Catherine reached for his hand, her fingers closing around his with quiet certainty. "That truth without spectacle can build something rare and valuable. That trust, once earned, is worth protecting, and that I would be honored to accept." As they sat together in the spring sunlight, a teacup sat nearby on a small table, uncovered, untested, the trust between them now as natural as breathing. No dramatic declarations, no grand gestures, only the quiet, profound certainty of two people who had chosen each other, eyes open, in full knowledge of both strength and vulnerability. A future built on truth, protected by vigilance, and illuminated by something that had begun with a whispered warning in a crowded room. "Don't drink that."